Before we dive into this powerful journey, I want you to pause and ask yourself one question. Why is there one nation that, despite decades of sanctions, threats, media campaigns, and even war, still stands firm, unbroken, and louder than ever? This isn't just a story of politics. This is a story of legacy, of belief, of a people who turned every attempt to silence them into a louder echo of defiance. This is not about headlines. This is about the heartbeat of a nation that refuses to be rewritten by foreign hands. As the world watches, questions, and sometimes misunderstands, Iran keeps walking its path, not because it's easy, but because surrender is not an option. In the next few minutes, we're not just going to explore why Iran can't be defeated by the West. We're going to uncover how its strength is shaped by history, culture, faith, strategy, unity, and a narrative that challenges the world's most powerful empires. So stay with me, because this isn't just about Iran. It's about what happens when a nation decides it would rather struggle on its feet than live on its knees. What you're about to hear might not be what the world shows you, but it's what the world needs to understand. Iran's story is not confined to modern borders or political systems. It is rooted in thousands of years of civilization that has seen empires rise and fall. From the powerful Achaemenid Empire to the enduring legacy of the Safavids, Iran has long been a force that shapes and resists history. No foreign invasion, no external dominance has ever truly erased the Iranian identity. Even the Greeks under Alexander, the Mongols under Hulagu, or modern Western interventions have failed to crush Iran's spirit. It adapts, it resists, and it reclaims itself. This legacy of resistance has become part of the national DNA. When the British and Russians tried to divide it during World War II, the people endured. When the CIA-backed coup in 1953 overthrew Prime Minister Mossadegh, the seeds of future rebellion were quietly planted. The 1979 Islamic Revolution didn't just change Iran's leadership, it was a reclamation of sovereignty, a message that no foreign power would dictate Iran's future. This legacy has created a national consciousness that views Western domination not only as a threat, but as a test of endurance. Unlike other nations that collapsed under the weight of foreign military bases or economic dependency, Iran resisted integration into the Western order. It chose isolation over submission, and that choice, while costly, has made it more resilient. Every generation is raised with stories, not of victimhood, but of perseverance, of poets and prophets who stood firm, of heroes who defied empire, of ordinary people who became the front lines of survival. It is not just political leadership that upholds this resistance. It is the people who internalize a history that demands defiance when sovereignty is threatened. This long tradition means the West is not confronting a weak, unstable regime. It is confronting a historical will that spans millennia. Iran's resistance is not reactive, it is cultural. It's inherited. It's woven into the very identity of being Iranian. When a nation carries with it thousands of years of surviving invaders, of outlasting empires, it learns that time is its ally. Iran thinks in centuries, not election cycle. It doesn't need to win every battle. It only needs to keep existing, and that alone frustrates the plans of those who hope to see it crumble swiftly. Iran's strength does not solely come from its military or political posture. It is deeply rooted in a culture that has endured for thousands of years, in a faith that gives meaning to sacrifice, struggle, and perseverance. Iranian identity is not shaped by conquest, but by poetry, language, art, and a profound spiritual worldview that blends Persian tradition with Islamic values. This cultural depth becomes a kind of armor, shielding the population from the psychological warfare and propaganda often used to weaken a nation's sense of self. A society steeped in the verses of Hafez, the philosophy of Rumi, and the teachings of the Quran does not collapse easily. These are not just artistic or religious symbols. They are pillars that reinforce resilience in the hearts of the people. When bombs fall or sanctions hit, Iran turns inward to its heritage, drawing strength from a collective soul that has weathered storms before. The role of faith in Iranian society cannot be underestimated. It does not operate merely at the level of ritual, but shapes how people interpret suffering and resistance. Martyrdom, for example, is not viewed as defeat, but as transcendence and honor. The memory of Karbala, the story of Imam Hussein, and the ethos of standing against tyranny, even when the odds are impossible. These are not distant tales, but living principles in everyday Iranian consciousness. This creates a society where endurance is sacred and resistance is holy. While the West often interprets such devotion as fanaticism or irrationality, within Iran it is seen as clarity of purpose and moral courage. Moreover, culture and faith work together to insulate Iran from the psychological impact of isolation. Western media may attempt to define Iran as rogue or backward, but internally the narrative is different. Iran sees itself as principled, patient, and self-respecting, a nation that has refused to sell its soul for temporary comfort. Its music, cinema, literature, and religious rituals all echo this deep inner strength. These cultural and spiritual anchors prevent the kind of identity erosion that imperial powers often rely on to destabilize nations from within. When identity is strong, the will to resist remains intact, even in the face of overwhelming external pressure. Iran's culture is not ornamental, it is a weapon of endurance. And its faith is not merely doctrinal, it is the fire. When the West imposed heavy economic sanctions on Iran, the intent was to cripple its economy, fracture its society, and force it into submission through economic despair. Yet Iran turned this pressure into a platform for self-reliance and resilience. Rather than collapsing under the weight of these restrictions, Iran adapted, innovated, and gradually built internal systems to reduce dependency on the global structures that were weaponized against it. The idea was never to outmatch the global economic powers, but to endure long enough for their influence to weaken. By doing so, Iran transformed sanctions from tools of suppression into catalysts for sovereignty. The oil industry, long seen as the backbone of Iran's economy, was forced to diversify. Domestic production expanded in areas like pharmaceuticals, agriculture, and military technology. Universities and research institutions began focusing on homegrown innovation, and a culture of local problem-solving emerged across industries. Iran didn't just survive the blockade, it learned how to walk through it without relying on those who once held the key. Sanctions that were meant to isolate ended up pushing Iran to discover its untapped capacities. A younger generation, raised under the shadow of restriction, grew up seeing creativity not as luxury, but necessity. They began to build startups, find alternatives, and develop technologies that allowed the country to stand on its own feet. This evolution was not just economic, it was psychological. The population learned not to wait on Western aid or approval. A sense of pride emerged from producing with limited means. Even as inflation and hardships persisted, there was a collective awareness that enduring pain for dignity was preferable to ease that came through surrender. The West believed that hunger would make the people revolt, but instead it made them resourceful. The more the world closed its doors, the more Iran built doors of its own. This internal shift in mindset marked a turning point. Iran was no longer begging for a seat at the global table. It was building its own. While many nations collapsed under similar pressures, Iran endured because the struggle became part of its identity. Its economic strategy was no longer reactive, but deeply purposeful. To become sanction-proof, it turned isolation into a proving ground. The sanctions didn't break Iran. They revealed its capacity to bend without shattering, to suffer without surrendering, and to grow under the very pressure meant to destroy it. Iran understands that it cannot match the West's military strength tank for tank or jet for jet, but it has never needed to. Instead, it relies on a strategy built on patience, unpredictability, and asymmetry. It does not follow the conventional rules of warfare because those rules were written by powers who rely on brute force. Iran's power lies in its ability to play the long game, to fight not just on battlefields, but in minds, media, alliances, and ideology. It has mastered the art of influence without invasion, presence without occupation, and impact without excessive visibility. Through this asymmetric approach, Iran wields more power than it would ever gain by direct confrontation. The backbone of this strategy is Iran's network of regional alliances and proxy forces. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various militias in Iraq and Syria extend Iran's reach far beyond its borders. These groups are not only militarily trained, but ideologically aligned, forming a web of resistance that responds to aggression against Iran with decentralized retaliation. This structure makes it nearly impossible for the West to launch a clean or contained attack. Any move against Iran could trigger a wave of unpredictable consequences across the region. The strength of this model lies in its ambiguity. No one ever quite knows when, where, or how Iran might respond, which makes confrontation costly and uncertain for its adversaries. Cyber warfare, strategic diplomacy, and psychological resistance are also key components of Iran's asymmetric strategy. It understands that modern wars are fought not only with weapons, but with narratives. By framing itself as a sovereign nation resisting imperial aggression, Iran garners support among oppressed populations worldwide. It becomes not just a country, but a symbol of resistance. This soft power, amplified through media channels and regional influence, becomes a force the West struggles to counter. Iran doesn't seek quick victories, it thrives on outlasting opponents. Its leaders often speak in terms of decades, not months, and its military doctrines emphasize survival and attrition over decisive engagements. This long-range thinking disorients Western policymakers who operate on short-term political cycles. Iran knows that even a superpower can be worn down if forced to fight shadows, chase uncertainty, and navigate constant instability. Through asymmetry, Iran turns its weaknesses into strengths, reshaping the battlefield in ways that make direct defeat nearly impossible. Throughout history, Iran has displayed a unique ability to unite under external pressure, regardless of internal divisions. Political disagreements, generational differences, and ideological tensions exist like in any country. But when Iran is threatened from outside, especially by Western powers, those divisions often fade into the background. A powerful sense of national identity and shared destiny takes over, reinforcing the belief that defending sovereignty is not a political stance, but a collective responsibility. Whether under monarchs, revolutionaries, reformists, or hardliners, the Iranian people have consistently shown that external threats trigger internal cohesion. This psychological and cultural reflex creates a firewall against foreign influence, making attempts to divide and conquer largely ineffective. This unity is not artificially manufactured. It is deeply ingrained through centuries of surviving invasions, coups, sanctions, and propaganda. Each act of foreign aggression becomes a unifying symbol, another chapter in the long narrative of resistance. For example, during the Iranian-Iraq War in the 1980s, despite initial political unrest following the Islamic Revolution, the country mobilized across every demographic. People from urban and rural areas, different religious and ethnic backgrounds, stood together to protect the homeland. That pattern of unity under siege repeated itself when U.S. sanctions intensified or when military threats loomed. In the face of foreign hostility, nationalism in Iran transforms from a passive sentiment into an active defense mechanism. The state also cultivates this unity by framing resistance as a moral obligation, not just a political reaction. Martyrs are honored, sacrifices romanticized, and history is constantly referenced to remind citizens of their unbreakable legacy. Even those who may disagree with the ruling establishment often shift their focus when national dignity is perceived to be at stake. They may protest domestic issues, but they stand firm when the nation is challenged from outside. This duality is difficult for outsiders to comprehend, yet it is a core feature of Iranian resilience. Western strategies that rely on exploiting domestic dissent often backfire in Iran. Rather than sparking collapse, they spark defiance. This instinctive unification under pressure makes Iran an unpredictable opponent. It does not fracture, it fuses. The more it is cornered, the stronger its collective resolve becomes. This unity is not fragile or temporary, an emotional inheritance. It is a force that cannot be manufactured, bought, or bombed out of existence. In the global battle of narratives, Iran has managed to shift the perception of its struggle from a regional dispute to a broader symbol of a resistance against Western domination. For every sanction imposed or missile launched, there's a growing segment of the world that doesn't just see Iran as an aggressor. It sees Iran as a nation standing up to a global order shaped by inequality and selective morality. This perception is especially strong in parts of the global South, where many nations have long histories of being exploited or colonized by Western powers. To these audiences, Iran's defiance resonates on a deeper level. It becomes a voice for the voiceless, a stand-in for all who have been dictated to, invaded, or coerced into submission. This shift in global sympathy is not accidental. It's cultivated through strategic communication and consistent messaging. Iranian leaders frame their actions not simply in terms of national interest, but as part of a larger ethical battle against imperialism and injustice. Whether it's defending Palestine, resisting foreign military presence in the region, or challenging the dominance of the US dollar, Iran consistently positions itself as fighting on behalf of a broader principle. This framing attracts admiration not just from states, but from people. Activists, intellectuals, students, and ordinary citizens who feel disillusioned with the hypocrisy of Western foreign policy. Social media and independent journalism have played a key role in amplifying this alternate narrative. In the age of digital awareness, it's harder for any one power to completely control the global story. Videos of Iranian resilience, speeches rejecting Western pressure, and coverage of the humanitarian effects of sanctions are shared worldwide, generating empathy and solidarity beyond Iran's borders. This soft power doesn't translate into military advantage, but it builds a wall of international opinion that complicates any Western efforts to isolate or demonize Iran entirely. Moreover, this narrative control limits the effectiveness of propaganda aimed at dehumanizing Iran. The more the West portrays Iran as a threat, the more many people question what lies beneath that fear. Instead of being seen as a destabilizing force, Iran is increasingly viewed as a nation unwilling to kneel, even when surrounded. This shift does not make Iran immune to criticism, but it does make it harder to defeat. For a nation that thrives on spiritual strength and historical memory, the ability to influence how the world sees its struggle becomes a powerful layer of protection. In the end, Iran's resilience is not built on the size of its army or the reach of its weapons. It is built on the unshakable spirit of its people, the weight of its history, the strength of its culture, and the depth of its faith. It has turned pressure into purpose, isolation into innovation, and war into wisdom. Where others might have crumbled, Iran stood taller. Not because it seeks conflict, but because it refuses to surrender. It doesn't chase domination, it demands dignity. Every attempt to break it has only exposed how deeply its roots run, how fiercely its people believe, and how far it is willing to go to protect its sovereignty. That is why, time and again, despite every sanction, every threat, every strategy, the West cannot defeat Iran. Not because Iran is perfect, but because it is powerful in the most enduring way, through belief, patience, and unyielding identity. Thank you for listening to this journey of truth, strength, and unwavering resistance. May it inspire you to stand tall in your own struggles, to hold firm in the face of pressure, and to always remember what cannot be defeated is what refuses to bow. Good luck in your path ahead, and thank you from the heart.